The lesson begins classroom aboard the orbiting Citadel, dazed with tension as the alien pupils filed into their seats. Above them, massive observation domes displayed the stars and the pale blue dot of Earth in the distance. The students were from dozens of different species, scaled, furred, armored, soft and yet. Each one settled into silence the moment instructor Jarek entered the chamber. Jarek, a tall creature with flowing silver filaments in place of hair, and 4 luminescent eyes, wore the ceremonial robes of the Council's teaching order. His kind, the Isari, had long served as the educators of the Unified Galactic Accord. His face, always unreadable to non-Isari, seemed particularly stern today. Without a word, Jarek tapped the control crystal embedded in the floor with his long staff. Instantly, a holoscreen flared to life, displaying a flickering image, a human soldier dragging a wounded alien comrade out of a burning shuttle. Behind them, an explosion bloomed in fiery silence. "Today's subject," Jarek said, his voice echoing across the curved walls, "is the species you all fear, admire, or misunderstand: humans." A low murmur spread through the room. Some students shifted uncomfortably. Others rolled their eyes or exchanged glances. Everyone had heard stories, some heroic, others terrifying. But none knew what to expect from this lesson. Jarek raised his hand. Silence returned. "You are here," he said, "because your homeworlds join the Accord through logic, diplomacy, or defeat. But you misunderstand why the humans were not conquered, why they were never absorbed by force, and why, even now, they remain equal members rather than subjects." He turned to the image of the soldier. "They are not the strongest, not the smartest, not the most numerous, but they are the most adaptable." Jarek flicked his wrist, and the holoscreen split into several new scenes. In one, humans in environmental suits built shelters on a sulfuric moon. In another, a team of explorers ate synthetic food in a freezing tundra. A child smiled through a cracked visor as a terraforming dome sealed shut. "You put them in desert," Jarek continued. "They find water. You drop them in snow. They build heat. You deny them food. They grow it from bacteria. You crush their bones. They heal. Stronger." A voice spoke up timidly from the back. A Selnari student with delicate wings and compound eyes. "But sir, aren't we all adaptable? My species altered its own genome to survive the migration to new star systems." Jarek turned his eyes on her. "Your species adapts slowly, over generations. They adapt by Tuesday." A few students chuckled, uncertain if it was meant to be funny. Jarek didn't smile. He pointed again, this time to a diagram showing brain scans. "Human brains," he explained, "are chaos engines. They are not optimized, but flexible. Fear becomes curiosity. Failure becomes motivation. Weakness becomes invention. Every limitation is merely a problem to solve." An armored car student grunted skeptically. "Then why do they fight each other so often?" Jarek nodded. "They do. And yet they form nations. They form alliances. Every war teaches them something. Every wound becomes a blueprint for improvement. Their history is a spiral, not a straight line, not a loop. Each turn closer to something greater." He tapped the control crystal again. A new clip played. A human child, no more than 7, was assembling a mechanical limb. She tested it on a wounded animal, then fitted it to her own injured father. The prosthetic worked. "They make tools from trash," Jarek said softly. "They learn without instruction. They explore without needing a destination. And when they lose everything, they do not surrender, they create." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "There is a reason," he said slowly, "that the Accord no longer considers Earth a backwater. We now study their philosophy, their psychology, their art, their mistakes." The class was silent, and above all else, Jarek added, "we study how they adapt. Because in the end, it is not power or purity or perfection that decides the future. It is the ability to change, to survive, to rebuild. Another student, this time a massive, tusked arm warrior, spoke up. Then why teach us about them at all, if they are so beyond comparison? Jarak gave a small nod, acknowledging the challenge, because, he said, the future will not be made by them alone, but it will be shaped by how well others learn from them, to work with them, or, if foolish enough, to face them. With a final gesture, he dismissed the hologram. You will study their history, their failures, their triumphs, not to copy them, but to understand why they endure. He turned and walked slowly toward the back of the classroom. Your test is next cycle. I advise you to study not just the facts, but the spirit. The students sat in stunned silence. The hum of the station around them suddenly loud in their ears. High above them, Earth shone silently through the viewport's mall, fragile, blue, but unbroken. Lessons from the ruins of Earth Room remained quiet long. Our instructor, Jarak, had finished his lecture. Most of the students hadn't blinked for the last several minutes, lost in thought, trying to digest what they had just heard. It wasn't the first time the subject of humans had come up in advanced studies, but this was the first time it felt like more than just another historical case file. As the holoscreen dimmed and the glow faded from the crystal pedestal, a low murmur rose among the students. It wasn't the usual chatter or boredom. This time, it was curiosity. Quietly, they exchanged glances, whispers, questions. After a pause, Jarak spoke again, but this time without his usual commanding tone. You want to understand humans, he said. Then you must start where they almost ended. The lights dimmed again, and a new scene appeared. It was Earth, but not as it was now. The planet's surface was scarred by deep craters, oceans polluted, forests burned to stumps. The skyline of once great cities lay in broken, jagged lines, covered in vines and ash. This is Earth. 400 years ago, Jarak said. A time when they nearly wiped themselves out. Students leaned forward. The image zoomed in to show footage reconstructed from old satellites and recovered data logs. There were wars, nuclear fires, pandemics, collapses of governments, collapses of climate. For most species, this would have been extinction. And yet, Jarak's voice grew firmer. But they didn't die. They didn't vanish. In the middle of starvation, riots, radiation, they built again. Not because it was easy, not because someone saved them, but because they refused to believe that the end was the end. The scene shifted again. A makeshift lab, powered by solar panels, built from scavenged parts, flickered into view. A young woman with no formal education, an AI fragment salvaged from a war drone to develop clean water filtration. Children tilled rooftop gardens on the remains of skyscrapers. Refugees from rival factions gathered in bombed-out subway tunnels to build schools, powered by kinetic floors and candlelight. They didn't wait for rescue, Jarak said. They became their own rescue. A pupil near the front, a Velari with translucent skin, raised a hand. But how? Without central command, without genetic augmentation or uniform species instinct. Jarak tilted his head, because they are not bound by unity of biology. They are unified by choice. Each human may differ in culture, language, even belief. But when survival is at stake, they find a way to stand side by side, not perfectly, not always peacefully, but consistently. Another image bloomed into view. A circle of humans, former enemies, sitting around a fire, trading stories. Their languages were different. Their clothes and scars spoke of different pasts, but they were sharing food, tending wounds, building something. That is where their strength lies, Jarak continued. In small acts, in moments where most others would only see defeat. The Velari student frowned. But they still make war, still commit cruelty, they still fall. Jarak nodded solemnly. Yes, and they get back up, again, and again. And again. He turned and gestured toward a side wall, which slid open to reveal an ancient artifact. It was a broken fragment, of human tech, a charred piece of spacecraft plating, crude by modern standards, but etched into its surface were words in a human script, scorched yet legible. Still here. The room fell silent again. This was found on the lunar surface, Jarak said. From the first wave of humans to return to space after the collapse. It wasn't meant for us. It wasn't meant for anyone else. It was a message they left for themselves, a reminder, a declaration. Pupil Sren, a low-voiced and skeptical Rakan, crossed two of his arms. But wouldn't it have been easier to give up, join a stronger species, submit and survive? Jarak shook his head. That is not how humans understand survival. They do not define it by submission. They define it by endurance. They endure pain, loss, time, even truth, and when they find no solution, they invent one. A new clip flickered onto the screen. A human child in a wheelchair, born during the years of solar famine, was shown laughing and using a homemade propulsion system crafted from drones and scrap. The child's smile burned brighter than the cold landscape behind her. She had no legs, Jarak said softly, and no nation to help her, but she had a mind and will. That was enough. Some students seemed visibly moved. Others struggled with the logic. A horned pupil from the Pyrrhic spoke up. So then, what makes them dangerous? Is it their weapons? Jarak turned to him. No, it's that they learn faster than you can predict. Break a bone, they build armor. Break their tools, they build machines. Break their hearts, and they build hope. He pointed at the students now. And if you think you can defeat them with brute strength, understand this. Their species once fought wars with sticks. And now they terraform moons, not because they're perfect, but because they never settle, never stop, never forget what it means to begin again. For a long moment, the classroom sat in silence, each student reflecting on what they'd seen. The stars continued to drift past outside the observation dome. Earth rotated slowly below them, a world reborn not by miracle, but by sheer refusal to die. Jarak placed his stuff gently against the side of the wall and folded his arms. This is why I teach you about humans. Not to make you fear them, not to make you follow them, but to remind you, adaptation is a choice, and some species choose it every single day. He looked around, voice quiet now. Your species will be tested. Maybe not now, maybe not for centuries. But when the moment comes, remember Earth, remember that even in the ruins, life grew again. He turned to the exit. Class dismissed. The human question even after class had been dismissed. Most of the students remained seated. Instructor Jarak had already left the room, his long robe sweeping across the polished floor. He disappeared into the corridor, but his words hung in the air like a scent, thick, lingering, impossible to ignore. A small group of students gathered near the edge of the observation dome, gazing down at Earth. The planet rotated peacefully, swathed in blues and greens. From here, it was impossible to see the scars of its past, but the lesson had made those invisible wounds feel very real. I still don't get it, said Jan, a broad-shouldered Zarnian whose culture had once taken pride in brute force. How can a species that fractures so often, that fights among itself for centuries, be called the best at adapting? Celine, the Velari with translucent skin, stood beside him. Maybe because they fracture and still survive. Across the room, in one of the dimmed corners, a pupil named Keza activated her personal archive device. She was from the Illunari, a species known for their long lifespans and flawless memory. Information streamed through her retinal implants as she scanned human records, wars, revolutions, disasters. I'm reading about their year called 2043, she said quietly. A climate cascade wiped out 3 continents worth of farmland. And do you know what they did? The others turned to her. They moved entire populations, millions, across oceans. Borders collapsed, but some nations dissolved peacefully. People shared housing, food, medicine. John snorted. That sounds idealized. Keza shook her head. No, it wasn't perfect. There was violence. There were betrayals. But even in that mess, they still planted crops in dead soil, turned skyscrapers into vertical gardens, built cities on the sea. Celine whispered. They called them hope ships. Floating habitats, made from recycled carriers. I've seen images. Beautiful. John crossed his arms. But why? Aren't they the dominant species in the Accord then? Why not the leaders of the Galactic Council? No one answered at first. Then came a voice from the far end of the room. They don't want to rule. Everyone turned. It was Aurex, a quiet, observant student of the Sitharithin, feathered beings known for calculating logic and detached emotion. Until now, Aurex had spoken no more than a few words in class. But now his violet eyes glowed with a strange light. I studied the diplomatic logs. Do you know what happened when humans were offered a controlling seat in the Accord Council? Jan raised an eyebrow. They accepted. Aurex shook his head. They declined. Keza blinked. Declined. Power, yes, said Aurex. They requested shared research, human access to the interstellar health network, free movement for cultural exchange, but not control. But why? Celine asked. Aurex gave a slow, thoughtful answer. Because humans do not seek control to feel strong. They seek understanding. Every new alliance, every new world, is not a conquest, but a question. The words settled deep into the group. They had grown up in a galaxy shaped by competition empires that rose and fell, species that were catalogued by strength and usefulness, and yet here was a species that defied all of it. Not by rejecting the galaxy, but by challenging its assumptions. Celine looked down at the planet again. I want to go there, not for study, not for grades, just to see. Jan frowned. You think they'd let us? A quiet chime echoed through the chamber. A new hello message blinked into life in the center of the room, authorized by the Citadel's administrative AI. A student exchange program. Earth-based learning. Application open to all species currently enrolled in Accord curriculum. It was scheduled for the next moon cycle rotation. Celine gasped. It's real, Keza whispered. The humans. They're inviting us. As the message ended, a new figure entered the room. And was not Jarak. She was human. Medium height. Brown skin kissed by sun. Hair tied back with a simple strip of cloth. She wore no uniform. Just a simple smart fabric tunic with utility belts, and a worn data tablet in her hand. Her eyes, sharp and full of quiet energy, scanned the room with interest. Sorry to interrupt, she said in clear Accord standard. I'm Dr. Liana West. I'll be your guest instructor for the next cycle. Earth history, human adaptability studies, practical philosophy. John stared. He had never seen a human up close. None of them had. Dr. West smiled. Jarak told me some of you had questions. Keza stood. You lived through the storm seasons, didn't you? Liana nodded. I did. I lost my home to the second typhoon arc in the North Pacific cluster. My family rebuilt on floating rafts. I studied medicine on a solar rig. I taught under candlelight when satellites failed. Celine stepped forward, her voice shaking. Is it true that humans keep going, no matter what? Liana's smile faded a little. Not sadness, just memory. We don't keep going because we're strong. We keep going because we have no other choice. Because life doesn't ask permission. It just is. And we meet it. She looked around the room. You want to understand humans? Then come walk in our ruins. Breathe our air. Drink the recycled water we purify from waste. Listen to the songs we wrote after losing everything. John muttered. That's what you call strength. Liana nodded. No, that's what we call being human. For the first time, the class didn't question it, because in her voice, in her presence, in her simple existence, they saw something terrifying and beautiful. Someone who had bent without breaking. Someone who had learned not by running from the fire but by walking through it. among the ashes transport shuttle descended through Earth's upper atmosphere, its wings glowing from friction. Inside, the students huddled near the transparent observation ports, eyes wide as they approached the surface. What lay below wasn't a shining capital or a polished city of steel and glass. It was something else entirely broken, wild, alive in strange ways. Keza clutched the edge of her seat, not out of fear, but awe. Great stretches of reforested plains swallowed the outlines of ancient highways. The ruins of once mighty skyscrapers lay scattered like bones of fallen titans, now cloaked in green moss and tangled vines. Rivers cut new paths through areas once paved by machines. It didn't look like victory. It didn't look like defeat. It looked like survival. As the shuttle neared the landing zone, a circular habitat emerged, half metal, half grown from genetically guided trees. A community surrounded by wind turbines, solar grids, and aquaponic domes shimmered under the soft orange light of the late sun. This was one of Earth's reclaiming zones, where humans and off-world volunteers worked side by side to heal the land. When the students disembarked, they were hit by the strange, thick weight of natural air. It was rich with unfamiliar smells: moisture, soil, pollen, the distant scent of something cooked over an open flame. Dr. Liana West greeted them, again, wearing thick gloves and stained coveralls. She didn't look like a lecturer. She looked like someone who worked with her hands. Behind her stood a few others, humans of various backgrounds, all marked by scars, burns, or cybernetic replacements, all smiling. "Welcome to Earth," she sighed. "Let's get to work." The students blinked. "Work," Liana nodded. "If you want to understand humans, you need to live like we do." That day, they were split into groups. Jan and Keza were assigned to help reinforce flood barriers near a mangrove marsh, while Celine and Aurex were paired with a group mapping fungal root systems that regenerated soil faster than synthetic terraforming ever could. At first, there was resistance. Jan found it ridiculous that he, a battle-hardened species, was shoveling mud beside a teenager with a prosthetic leg. But the girl worked with quiet determination, not once complaining. She explained how her parents had drowned during a coastal breach. Now, she helped build better defenses. Keza struggled with the smell and the mess, but when an elderly man with wrinkled hands handed her a grafting tool and said, "Help me bring this grove back to life," she obeyed. She didn't ask why. She just did. Over the next several days, the students began to change. They rose with the sun, helped purify water, repaired broken infrastructure, shared meals with locals. The humans never spoke of pride or superiority. They spoke of duty, of community, of remembering the past, not to dwell on it, but to build beyond it. One night, after the last generator hummed into rest and the sky filled with stars, the students sat in a circle around a fire. Real firewood gathered from deadfall, kindled, with spark stones, no holograms, no AI servers. Just warmth and light. Liana sat with them, cross-legged. Celine leaned toward her. How did it all begin again? After the collapse, Liana smiled faintly. There wasn't a single moment. Just small ones. One person planting a tree, another fixing a broken drone, a village refusing to flee, a mother teaching her child under an open sky. Over time, it became a movement. Keza whispered. "But no one gave you orders." "And no," Liana said. "The world gave us a reason. That was enough." Aurex, ever the quiet observer, finally asked, "Why didn't you abandon Earth?" Liana looked up at the stars. "Because this is our home, and humans. We don't leave home until we know we've given it everything we have." Jan, eyes still doubtful, said, "But what about revenge? You must have blamed others." "Fought back. We did," Liana admitted. "And we learned. Anger is fuel, but it burns fast. Hope lasts longer. When you rebuild from nothing, you don't have time for enemies. You only have time for solutions." That night, they slept in bio-weave shelters that swayed softly in the wind. and for the first time since leaving the citadel, the students dreamed not of war or conquest, but of growth. The next morning, disaster struck. A nearby dam, weakened by decades of erosion, failed under sudden rainfall. Flash floods roared down the valley toward a settlement of hybrid dwellings and solar farms. Without waiting for orders, humans rushed into action. Liana barked instructions. Locals formed sandbag lines, activated emergency batteries, rerouted water with makeshift channels, but the students hesitated. There was no structured chain of command, no protocol. Just chaos and instinct. Keza stepped forward first. She used her drone swarm to lift children across a broken bridge. Celine extended her bayonets to support collapsing supports. Jan, roaring with effort, used his bolt to block debris, while others scrambled to safety. No one stopped to think. They adapted. By the time the floodwaters receded, the damage was minimized. No lives lost. That night, Liana looked at her exhausted students, soaked, muddy, and shaking from adrenaline. She said only 3 words, "Now you understand." Jan didn't reply. He didn't need to, because in the heart of that moment, while knee-deep in mud, blood, and courage, he'd seen it clearly. Humans didn't thrive because they were better. They thrived because when the world fell apart, they stood up anyway. The price of progress. 2 weeks passed. The students no longer felt like guests. They no longer flinched when they walked through the shattered ruins of old cities. They no longer hesitated when a job needed doing. Some had started wearing local gear, learned basic Terran dialects, and stopped seeing humanity as a curiosity. Now, they saw humans as something far more dangerous and far more inspiring. Keza found herself waking early each day to help an elderly biologist repair a greenhouse. The man, despite his age, could still climb scaffolding faster than she could. Every seedling was planted with care, every crop tested for resilience. There was no central planner, no fleet-backed resource drop, just people trying, failing, trying. Again. Sylen began tutoring children in basic astrometrics. She thought she'd be the one teaching, but the children, some barely literate, asked her questions no Accord Academy had ever posed. One girl had built her own solar observatory in kitchen pots and salvaged lenses. Alex, ever analytical, quietly recorded their behavior, how humans organized without a leader, how they shared tools without asking, how disputes were solved, not through logic, but compromise. He tried to map it like a system, but the more he studied, the more he realized it wasn't a system, it was instinct. Trained through generations of hardship, John remained the most resistant. He helped in construction, he pulled loads, he assisted with repairs, but he stayed silent until one day that silence broke. They had gone to the edge of the wastelands, an area still unsafe for most life, slowly undergoing rebuilding. There, they found an old crater, not from a meteor, not from natural decay, a crater left by a human-made weapon. The humans didn't hide it. In fact, a monument had been built in the center, a sculpture made of melted steel beams, twisted by impact, welded together into the shape of an outstretched hand. Beneath it were simple words, "We did this. We learned." Jan stood still for a long time. He looked at Liana, who had accompanied them. "Why would you leave something like this standing? Why not bury it?" She didn't look away. "Because pretending it didn't happen would make it happen again." Celine stepped forward. "This was during your own civil conflicts." Liana nodded. "Fourth Global War, the last of the nation wars. That crater, it was one of 500. Millions died." Keza swallowed. "But now, you live just outside of it. We live because of it," Liana said. "The ruins taught us what our victories never did." That night, as the wind howled through the valley and lightning traced jagged lines in the sky, the students gathered around Liana again. They had more questions than ever, not about war, but about healing. "How did you forgive yourselves?" Alex asked. Liana stirred the fire slowly. We didn't, not fully. But we chose not to be defined by our worst day. John finally spoke. You're not the strongest. You're not the most unified. And yet, you're still here. Liana looked at him. Exactly. He turned his eyes to the fire. You're dangerous, she nodded. So are you. So is anyone with a will. John clenched his fists. But I was bred for war. You were not. Liana smiled. And yet, we both survived. The next morning, a team from the Galactic Accord arrived to observe. They were not educators. They were officials, dignitaries, political minds who had never set foot in these lands. They wanted to interview the humans, assess progress, suggest integration, but they had come with expectations, and those expectations were quickly shattered. One of the officials, a tall, porcelain-skinned diplomat from the Valia High Circle, approached Liana. You've restored 18% of this zone, the Valia sighed, but you are underproductive. Why not request labor drones from the Accord's Central Resource Bank? Liana replied calmly. Because those drones weren't built to know which soil here holds radiation. Ours were built by hands who lived here, who remember what burned. Another official stepped in. Why not relocate the population and optimize this region for terraforming? Keza responded before Liana could. Because people belong here. Their families died here. Their cities fell here. This isn't just dirt, it's memory. The officials were silent. John added, voice low, and you can't optimize memory. You live with it. You build on it. That evening, the officials left, their reports filled with data they could not quantify: cultural resilience, distributed cognition, decentralized problem solving. But what mattered most could not be GRAPHED. The next day, a message came from the Citadel, an announcement. A proposal had been submitted to create a permanent Terran Academy of Adaptation, a place where students from all across the galaxy could come to learn not about technology or warfare but survival, perseverance, adaptability. Instructor Jarek's name was listed among the founding sponsors. The students looked at each other. Keza whispered, they want us to stay. Celine smiled. Not as visitors, Alrex nodded. As witnesses, as students. John looked toward the rising sun over a shattered skyline. As allies, and for the first time in their short lives, they realized something no textbook or simulation had ever taught them. Humanity was not great because of power. It was great because when it lost everything, it never lost itself.